My ex-wife and estranged son sold my body while I was sedated, one kidney at a time, my organs traded for offshore money. That's when I decided to stop being a victim, and start being the one they fear. I was still groggy from the anesthesia when the nurse adjusted my fore and whispered, "Don't worry, Mr. Granger. The organ removal went smoothly." Organ removal? I blinked, struggling to focus. I had come in for a simple hernia operation, nothing more. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to sit up, but pain exploded in my side. "What organ?" I croaked, my voice like gravel. The nurse froze. "Oh, you don't know?" Her face flushed, and she backed away, muttering something about getting the doctor. "My name is Elliot Granger. I'm 68 years old. Until last month, I lived a quiet, retired life in Vermont, books, coffee, and morning walks with my golden retriever, Samson. I'd been divorced for over a decade, and my only son, Caleb, hadn't spoken to me since I refused to co-sign a loan for his business scam. I thought I was alone. I preferred it that way. But that morning in the hospital, everything changed. When the doctor finally entered, flanked by two other men in lab coats who avoided my eyes, he said words I'll never forget. "You agreed to donate your left kidney, Mr. Granger. Your son and ex-wife signed the supplemental release forms. Everything was legal." I felt like I was choking on invisible hands. "What do you mean they signed for me?" "While you were sedated," he said gently. "They were listed as your next of kin. You don't remember consenting?" I didn't. Because I hadn't. My voice trembled as I said, "My ex-wife and I have been divorced for 14 years. And my son hasn't seen me in 5. But it was too late. The damage was done. My side burned where they'd carved me open, but the real pain hadn't started yet." That night, I lay awake with one question drilling into my skull: why? Why would Caleb and Melissa do this to me? By the next morning, I had my answer, or at least a terrifying piece of it. I bribed a nurse with a $100 bill to let me use her hospital computer. What I found sent ice through my veins. A medical logistics firm had processed the donation. And that firm was connected to a private offshore account linked to Caleb's name. I printed everything I could before the nurse returned. When she saw the screen, her face went pale. "You shouldn't be looking at that," she whispered. They're watching people who dig too deep." "Who's they?" I asked, but she backed out of the room without another word. That's when I knew, this wasn't just betrayal. This was a criminal network. And I was their most inconvenient witness. My hands shook as I stared at the signature on the consent form. It was shaky, but it looked like mine. They'd forged it. Used my blood. My body. My trust. And sold it. I don't know what shook worse, my soul or my remaining organs. I had no idea how deep this went, or how far they'd go to keep it hidden. But one thing was clear, my own family sold me, piece by piece. And they weren't finished yet. Before you go, if this story pulled you in even a little, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me, where are you listening from? I'd love to know which corners of the world are hearing my voice. Because trust me, the rest of this story only gets darker. I left the hospital a week later, against their advice. My wound hadn't fully healed, and I could barely stand without feeling like my spine was made of rusted wire. But I had to get out. I had to see Caleb's face. Not on a screen. Not through memories. In person. I needed to ask him, to see if he could look me in the eye and explain how he let them slice into me like I was cattle. When I showed up at his downtown condo, I rang the doorbell 4 times before he opened it. And when he did, he smiled. "Dad," he said with rehearsed surprise. "You're walking already?" That smile. It wasn't relief. It wasn't guilt. It was confidence. Casual cruelty dressed in a son's face. I stared at him, my jaw tight, my ribs aching beneath the pressure bandage. You know why I'm here. He blinked once, twice, then stepped aside to let me in like nothing had happened. You should sit down, Dad. You don't look so good. I walked in anyway. His place looked too expensive for someone who had supposedly lost everything. Polished marble counters. Smart lighting. Imported rugs. All on a salary that never existed. I sat on the edge of a leather couch and waited. When he brought me water, I didn't touch it. Where's the money, Caleb? I asked. What money? He replied, all innocence. Don't play dumb. The kidney. You and your mother signed those forms. You mean Mom? His voice went flat. She handled most of it. I just went along. I scoffed. You always just go along. That's what you did when your mother drained my bank account before the divorce. And now? You went along while they carved out my body for profit? He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He leaned back and studied me, almost like he pitied me. You weren't using it, he said softly. You live alone, you barely leave the house. You've been wasting what little time you have left. We figured someone else could benefit from it. You sold it for $75,000, I hissed. And you spent it on that coffee table, that goddamn painting. You're not even ashamed. Caleb smiled again. I signed the form. But Mom made the deal. She said she'd cut me out if I didn't help. Where is she now? I asked. Somewhere warm, he said. She left the country last week. I gripped my knees to keep from launching myself at him. I'd never hit my son before. But right then, I understood why some fathers do. Why me? I whispered. Why now? Because you never gave us anything, he said. You always held back. Now you've finally contributed to something. His words made me feel like a carcass. Something to be harvested. And then he said something worse. You're not the only one, you know. There are others. People who wake up missing more than a kidney. You're lucky you got to walk away. My mouth went dry. What do you mean others? The people Mom's working with, they've done this before. They have lists. Targets. People with no family, no digital footprint. You were easy to exploit, Dad. You were a trial run. And you survived. My whole body went numb. I stood, slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. You need help, Caleb. The kind no rehab can offer. You're rotting. He shrugged. You're the one falling apart, old man. I didn't say another word. I walked out, feeling the stitches tug at my side with every step. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor of organized betrayal. And I wasn't going to be their silent test subject. Not anymore. I had something they didn't count on. I had time. And rage. And nowhere left to go but toward the truth. I would find out who else was involved. I would pull up every document, every shell company, every name. Because if I didn't stop them, more people, lonely people, sick people, forgotten people, would end up waking to the same nightmare. And next time, it might not stop at one kidney. 2 days later, I drove 3 hours to the hospital's records department. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want them shredding evidence before I arrived. I wore a loose jacket to hide the bandage over my abdomen, walked with a slight limp, and clutched a small black notebook under my arm, filled with names, notes, theories, and something close to madness. When I asked for a copy of my surgical consent forms, the receptionist raised an eyebrow. We usually require a subpoena for this level of detail, sir. I leaned in close and whispered, that's fine. But if you'd rather I go to the press first, I'm sure they'll be interested in how your staff amputated an organ without real consent." Her face changed. 5 minutes later, I was in a back office with a low-level manager and a man from legal. They handed me a thin packet of papers with a sticky note labeled "Patient Approved." On top was the document that haunted me. It looked just like my signature. Loopy, a little rushed, but similar enough to pass a scan. Only it wasn't mine. I hadn't signed a damn thing. "Can I see the original ink version?" I asked. The legal guy stiffened. "What you're holding is the official digital copy. That's all we store now. No audit trail. No video footage of me signing it. No. But your son and former spouse were present as authorized signatories. It's in our system." I held up the form and studied the fine print. A clause jumped out at me: secondary consent may be granted in the event of patient sedation if next of kin provides sufficient documentation. My stomach turned. They'd planned it perfectly. Waited until I was under anesthesia, then submitted fake credentials and forged approvals. I looked up. "How often does this happen?" The room went quiet. "It was a rare situation," the manager said too quickly. "A misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that left me with one kidney and a trail of lies." I snapped. "I want everything. Staff names. Surveillance logs. The name of the medical coordinator who processed the organ transport. Now." The lawyer gave a tight smile. "If you'd like to pursue legal action, I suggest hiring counsel." I leaned forward and said it slowly. "You think I'm here for a lawsuit? I'm here for the truth. And I'm not going away." I left with copies of the documents and a name: Dr. Roland Greaves, the hospital's liaison for surgical reallocations. I Googled him the second I got to my car. He wasn't listed on the hospital's public website. But buried in an archived research article from 6 years ago, I found his name attached to a medical startup, Humanexus Biologics, now dissolved. The company had been investigated for irregularities in patient trial consent. Charges dropped. Record sealed. But the moment I saw that name, a chill slid down my spine. Humanexus. That was the name printed on the back of one of the pages I'd stolen from the hospital printer weeks ago. They were back. Just under a different name. I spent the rest of the day in a library downtown, combing through archived web pages, tracking corporate connections. What I found made my hands shake. Humanexus had quietly funneled millions into shell companies over the past decade, companies linked to black market transplants, donation tourism, and undocumented patient trials. And one of the board members was Melissa Granger. My ex-wife. She hadn't just gone along with Caleb's plan. She'd been in this game from the beginning. She had used our marriage as cover for a medical smuggling empire. I stared at her photo in an old charity gala article, smiling, hand on some politician's shoulder, like a first lady of Frankenstein. I thought of the way she used to bring me soup when I was sick. The way she cried when Caleb was born. Was any of it real? Or was I always just a vessel, flesh waiting to be cashed in? My vision blurred, not from rage, but heartbreak. I had been married to a monster. And now that I'd uncovered the start of her empire, I had to decide: expose it now, or go deeper. Burn the surface, or dig up the whole rotting core. I chose to dig. Because now, I had a new question. Not who betrayed me. I knew that. But how many others were sold while sedated? How many others like me were walking around, stitched up, broken, and silent? I had a name. I had a trail. And I had nothing left to lose. I never would have noticed it if the hotel mirror wasn't lit so harshly. It was early morning, and I was drying off after a hot shower, steam still clinging to the air like breath in winter. I raised my arm to inspect the still tender incision from my kidney surgery, and that's when I saw it. Lower. Further back. just above my hip. A second scar. Thin, almost surgical in its precision, about 3 inches long. I stared, my heart starting to pound. That hadn't been there before. I knew my body. I'd been in that hospital gown for days, studied every inch of my bruised and bloated torso. But this scar, it was new. Or at least it had been hidden well. My mind raced. Had they taken something else? I'd only been told about the kidney. But if there was a second incision, deliberate, and not in line with the hernia repair or the nephrectomy, they had cut deeper. I stood there for nearly 20 minutes, staring at that scar as if it would open its mouth and confess. It didn't. So I went back to the hospital. Not as Elliot Granger this time, but under a false name I'd lifted from a fake ID site online. I told them I wanted a full abdominal scan. Said I had a history of internal bleeding and felt pressure near my lower back. I paid in cash. No records, no questions. A technician named Suri handled my scan. Young. Kind. Tired looking. When she pulled up the results, her face changed. "You're missing part of your adrenal gland," she said quietly. "And there's a small metallic clip inside your body cavity." "What kind of clip?" I asked. "Surgical marker. Usually used to tag a site for future reference or identification." My blood ran cold. Why would I have that? She hesitated. "Maybe prep for another surgery. Some transplants use it for matching or tracking." She trailed off when she saw my face. I was shaking. "You okay, sir?" I didn't answer. Because suddenly it all made sense. They hadn't just taken my kidney. They'd marked me. Like inventory. Like a livestock tag for the next harvest. I grabbed the scan printout and left without paying the rest of the balance. I sat in my car, staring at the cloudy image of my insides. Part of me was gone. Another part labeled for pickup. My own body wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the highest bidder. That night, I returned to my motel and bolted the door. I opened my laptop, hands trembling, and searched for medical tags like the one Suri had mentioned. What I found was worse than I imagined. These metallic clips were used in underground procurement programs, illegal transplant rings that cataloged donors by internal tags, often without their consent. They called them ghost contributors. People who weren't legally dead, but weren't protected either. People like me. I stayed up all night, reading testimonies from whistleblowers, watching leaked videos, screenshots, diagrams. One phrase kept repeating: "They tag you before they drain you." I wanted to scream. To sob. But instead, I did what I had to do. I made copies of everything. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring. "Elliot," he said, surprised. "It's been forever." "James," I whispered, "I need your help. I think they're going to kill me. And I think my son helped them plan it." I expected him to hang up. He didn't. "Where are you?" he asked. "I'm coming." He didn't ask why. He just said he was coming. And for the first time since I woke up without part of my body, I didn't feel entirely alone. But even that hope was short-lived. Because the next morning, someone slipped a note under my motel room door. No envelope. Just one line in red ink: "Next time, we'll take the rest." The note was handwritten, no signature, just the kind of shaky red ink that makes your skin crawl. I stared at it for a long time, every breath shallow. Someone had been outside my room. Close enough to slide paper under my door. Close enough to watch me. And they knew I was digging. I burned the note in the bathroom sink with a motel matchbook, watching it curl and blacken until it turned to ash. Then I packed everything: documents, laptop, the X-ray with the embedded tag, and waited. I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window in a hard vinyl chair with a folded steak knife in my palm, waiting for James to arrive. He showed up 6 hours later, in an old truck that wheezed like a smoker. When he saw me, he barely said a word. Just grabbed my shoulder, looked into my face like he didn't recognize the man he'd grown up with. "You lost weight," he muttered. "And color." "I lost more than that," I said. "Let's go." We drove in silence to his cabin in the Catskills, 3 hours upstate, buried behind pine and fog and old fences. A place without cell towers or cameras. It was the safest I'd felt since waking up post-op. But even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I told James everything. From the scar to the forged papers to Melissa's face buried in corporate scandal. And when I showed him the scan with the embedded clip, he flinched like he'd been punched. "Jesus, L," he whispered. "They're turning you into a parts list." "They already started," I said. "This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about survival." James worked security for years, and he still had contacts, guys who owed him favors, ex-police, burned-out tech specialists. He made a few quiet calls using a burner phone he kept in a coffee can in the attic. Within 2 days, one of his contacts got us something explosive. A leaked internal report from a South Florida clinic flagged for ethically gray experimental procedures. Inside the report was a name I hadn't seen before, Project Lazarus. And listed beneath it, under known donor profiles, was a partial medical ID, mine. My chest went cold. "What the hell is Project Lazarus?" I asked. "Organ resuscitation tech," James replied. "Rumored stuff. Unregulated. Supposedly they're trying to keep extracted organs viable longer using synthetic hormones and electrical stimulation. That way, they can ship them farther. More profit. Using people like me. Using you specifically. They tagged you as a viable donor candidate. And you survived the test run." I sat back, heart thudding. It all made sense now. The forged signature. The missing kidney. The metal clip. I wasn't just a victim, I was their proof of concept. A walking lab rat for organ laundering. But there was something else in the report. A page with billing codes tied to organ transfer logistics. Listed under recipient aliases were destinations: Mexico City, Bucharest, Jakarta. International trafficking. This wasn't just a one-off. It was global. The worst part? One of the billing codes was connected to a charity Melissa and I had once donated to back in the 90s. Hearts Without Borders. I thought it was just a fund for pediatric transplants. But now, it was laundering blood money, literally. "They've been building this for decades," I whispered. "Layer upon layer." James nodded. "They're careful. But they're arrogant. And that's how we'll crack them." That night, James gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks. A plan. We tracked the money trail through Melissa's old business partners. Cross-referenced the recipient lists with the leak. And we'd find someone willing to talk, someone inside the ring who had gotten out. Because there had to be one. There always is. But before we could even start the next day, the cabin's power cut out. The lights went dark. And from the tree line beyond the porch, we heard it, footsteps. Multiple. Heavy. Deliberate. And then a voice from the shadows: "We warned you, Mr. Granger. Now we've come to collect the rest." James didn't hesitate. He flicked open the drawer beneath the hallway lamp and pulled out the loaded Glock he kept wrapped in an old sock. "Down," he whispered, and I dropped to the floor behind the couch as the front door creaked under pressure, slow, not like a break-in, but like they wanted us to know they were there. To make us feel the fear. I clutched the steak knife still in my coat pocket, a joke against whatever force waited outside, but I refused to go down like some sedated lab rat again. Not now. Not ever. James peeked out through the side curtain. 2, he said. Maybe 3. Black vans. No plates. I didn't ask how he knew. I trusted him. Then we heard it, the soft scratch of metal sliding into the lock. Whoever they were, they had tools, professional ones. This wasn't a random scare tactic. They were here to extract. James motioned for me to move toward the basement steps. Go, he mouthed. There's a trapdoor in the pantry. Crawl space under the floorboards. Stay there till I say. No, I whispered. I'm done hiding. But before we could argue more, the door burst open. The first man in wore surgical scrubs under a black tactical vest. That image, so clean, so wrong, burned into my mind. The others followed, headlamps on, visors down. Silent. Efficient. Like an organ recovery team operating outside the rules of time and morality. Elliot Granger, the lead one, called out, scanning the room. This doesn't have to be messy. You've already been marked. James fired. Once. The man dropped like a tree. The others responded fast, sweeping in, ducking, one flipping the coffee table for cover. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. I crawled behind the couch, adrenaline numbing the pain in my abdomen. My scar throbbed with each movement, like it could sense the hands that had first cut it. Then something inside me snapped. I wasn't just their target. I was their failed experiment. And failed experiments burn the lab down. I grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, crept to the corner of the room, and when one of them turned the wrong way, I swung, hard. It cracked against his helmet, but the weight sent him staggering. James finished it. Another shot. Another body down. The last one ran. Coward. He darted into the woods with the speed of someone trained not to die. But he left behind something important, his satchel. I grabbed it as James locked the door, breathing heavy. Blood pooled at the edge of the rug, soaking into pine boards neither of us had wanted to stain. You okay? James asked. Not even close, I replied, flipping open the satchel. Inside were two things that made my heart stop cold, a biometric scanner and a folded manila folder with a glossy label, Granger, Elliot, scheduled for reclamation. There was more. Photos of me from the motel. Notes on my diet. Sleep patterns. Maps of the cabin. They knew everything. I was a walking harvest schedule. A piece of inventory whose expiration date was past due. I sat down, suddenly nauseous. James poured me a glass of whiskey, and for once, I didn't refuse. They won't stop, I said. Not until I'm in pieces. Then we won't stop either, he said. You've got a story, Elle. A hell of a story. But stories don't matter if no one hears them. You mean go public? I mean blow it wide open. And what if they kill me before I get the chance? James looked at the blood on the floor, then at the bodies cooling in his living room. Then at least we'll leave scars of our own. I nodded. He was right. I couldn't stay on the defensive anymore. I'd bled enough. It was time to make them bleed with truth. But to do that, I needed someone on the inside, someone who knew the operation from behind the scrub masks and offshore accounts. I needed a whistleblower. And I knew exactly where to find one. Her name was Dr. Livia Hendricks. She once led the experimental transplant unit at a private clinic in Miami, one that quietly shut down 3 years ago after an anonymous tip led to an internal audit. No charges were filed. No official wrongdoing found. But Livia disappeared. Until 2 nights ago. James' contact, a former DEA analyst, sent us a location ping from a prepaid cell traced to a woman going by the alias H-Liv. She was living under a fake name in a remote part of Tennessee, off-grid, no utilities, no ID, no connections. A ghost. But the kind of ghost who knows where the bodies are buried, because she helped bury them. We left the cabin at dawn, buried the satchel under a stump marked with a cross of nails, and drove through winding forest roads. I didn't say much. Every mile closer to her, the weight in my chest grew heavier. I had no idea if she'd talk, or even open the door. But I had one thing she might not expect: a living body with a surgical tracking clip still inside it. A walking receipt. Her place was a one-story shack camouflaged in ivy, tucked behind a rusted "No Trespassing" sign. James stayed in the car. I approached slowly, limping still, my shirt untucked to hide the sweat. When I knocked, no one answered. But I felt eyes watching. "Dr. Hendricks," I said aloud, "I'm not here to expose you. I'm already exposed. Literally." I lifted my shirt and turned slightly to show the scar, then took out the scan I'd folded into my jacket. "You put this in people, didn't you? Tags for the ones who didn't know they'd be next." The door creaked open an inch. A shotgun muzzle appeared first. "Back up," came a voice, dry, brittle, cracked with disuse. "Back up 3 steps." I did. Slowly. Then the door opened fully. She looked haunted. Hair gray and chopped blunt, face lined deep, hands trembling as she lowered the barrel. "How did you find me?" "I didn't," I said. "They did. And then I found them." I showed her the photo from the folder marked reclamation. Her own name was listed on a separate page beneath mine. "They're still watching you, Livia. But now they're watching me harder." Her eyes welled slightly, but she blinked it away fast. "You shouldn't have come here." "Neither should they have," I said. "They already took one of my kidneys. Tagged me like livestock. My son and ex-wife signed it away for money. And the only reason I'm standing here right now is because they thought I wouldn't fight back." She hesitated. Then opened the door wide enough for me to step in. The house was bare. No photos. No clocks. Just piles of medical papers, worn furniture, and a smell of dust and rubbing alcohol. Livia sat across from me, her hands nervously clenching and unclenching. "You don't understand what they're building," she said. "It's not just transplants anymore. They're investing in tech that keeps human parts alive indefinitely. Lab-assisted preservation, cellular manipulation. They've figured out how to store what matters, and discard the rest." "And what happens to the rest?" I asked. "Same thing that happened to me. They came for my license, then for my life." She pulled down her collar to reveal a scar at her clavicle. "They tagged me too. When I tried to back out." I stared, breath tight. "You worked with them?" "Not like that," she snapped. "I believed it was about saving lives, using donor programs to bridge transplant shortages. Until I realized they were creating shortages on purpose. Manufacturing desperation. And profiting from it." She handed me a file from under the floorboard, wrapped in wax paper, labeled Mordecai Protocol. Inside were names, medical profiles, and disturbing classifications. Category A, vital. Category B, marked. Category C, discarded. "I'm Category B," I whispered. "Marked for reclamation." "You're more than that," she said. "You're an anomaly. Most Category B patients never wake up. Or if they do, they disappear within weeks. You weren't supposed to survive. Or speak. Why didn't they just finish the job then?" "Because you still have value," she said. "They're watching what happens when someone like you fights back. You're a test again. Just a different kind." I swallowed hard. "Then let's give them a test result they won't forget." Livia leaned forward, eyes hard. "You want to bring them down? I can help. But once you open this door, there's no closing it. You'll be hunted from the inside out." "They already are," I said. I'm just done pretending I don't feel the teeth. She gave the slightest nod. Then listen closely. I know someone inside the operation, deep inside. Codename, Pelican. They handle logistics, asset movement, and cleanup. If we can reach him, we might flip him. But if they find out we're looking, we won't get a second chance. I leaned back, exhaled slowly. Then let's make the first one count. The next morning, we left the Tennessee shack before the sun rose. Livia rode in the back seat with a satchel full of documents that made my stomach turn every time she opened it. Inside were files from her clinic days, photos of sedated patients with fresh incisions, internal memos about reclamation schedules, and surveillance stills of operating rooms that looked more like butcher shops. No anesthesia machines. No patient consent. Just steel tables and quiet horror. But the most valuable piece. A burner number scribbled in the corner of a printout marked Pelican, South Route Logistics. Livia had scribbled one note beside it, trusts money. Distrusts silence. He doesn't speak on calls, she warned as we pulled off into a dusty truck stop parking lot somewhere in Georgia. Only texts. He uses coded phrases, always in third person. If he talks to us, it means he's scared. And if he's scared, we've already made too much noise. James stood watch as I sent the first message. From, number we purchased yesterday, to, Pelican's burner, message, B has shifted. Inventory spoke. Trust must move. New offer. I waited. Each second passed like a drop of acid. Then finally, reply, meeting is noise. Location will change. Graveyard of trains. Midnight. Come alone. Graveyard of trains. Livia knew exactly where he meant. An abandoned rail yard in Birmingham that once held decommissioned Amtrak cars. Now it was just rust and weeds, and, apparently, the kind of place where black market logisticians arranged deals. You can't go alone, James growled. It's a setup. It's always a setup, I said. But if he wanted me dead, I wouldn't have lived long enough to read that text. I wore a wire that night. One of James' tech friends mailed us a voice recorder the size of a button. Livia stitched it to the hem of my collar like she was sewing up a wound. He'll come armed, she warned. You keep your hands where he can see them. And don't lie. He smells fear like a dog. The train yard was colder than I expected. Wind blew through the hollowed-out cars, rattling tin and rotted metal. At 11:59, I stood under a rusted caboose with my heart knocking against my ribs. Then I saw him. Tall. Lean. Dressed like a janitor. He wore gloves despite the heat, and his eyes, they were dead. Not angry. Not nervous. Just void. Like someone who'd seen too much to care anymore. He didn't greet me. Just circled me once, hands in his pockets, then finally said in a flat voice, inventory never recovers. You're a flaw. Maybe I am, I replied. But a flaw that talks is dangerous. He nodded once. They underestimated pain tolerance. Should have waited longer. You weren't supposed to make it to discharge. They tagged me, I said. And others. I've seen the documents. Mordecai Protocol. You handle logistics. You move bodies like furniture. He flinched at that word. Bodies. Not patients. Not people. Just cargo. What do you want? He asked. I want to burn the house down, I said. And I want you to help me hold the match. He didn't laugh, but he smirked. Just a twitch of his lip. And why would Pelican betray the nest? Because the nest already has your number, I said, holding up the folder Livia gave me. You've been marked too. Category C. They want you gone. You're a liability now. That hit him. A flicker of fear darted across his eyes before the flatness returned. I always knew I'd be part of the inventory one day. But not yet. Then help me stop them. Not for me. For the people who don't wake up screaming. The ones who never get to find their scar. He stood still for what felt like hours. Then he slowly reached into his jacket. I braced for steel, but he handed me a flash drive. Small. Black. Unmarked. Schedules. Names. Drop zones. You have 4 days before they purge the servers. After that, even I won't exist. And after that? I asked. He looked over his shoulder. After that, we all become meat. He turned and walked into the dark. I didn't call after him. I just clutched the drive and ran back to the car where James and Livia were waiting, engine humming. I plugged it into Livia's offline laptop and watched the files load. And what we saw nearly made me vomit. 52 patients. Dates. Medical tags. Reclamation instructions. Each labeled by code and destination. And the next one scheduled. Category B, Granger, Elliot. Extraction window, 4 days. They hadn't given up. I was still marked. But now, so were they. The flash drive was a trove of horror. Not just mine, but theirs too. Livia scrolled line by line through the spreadsheet, her lips pressed into a pale, bloodless line. The list was sorted alphabetically by last name. I expected to see mine. What I didn't expect was what followed. Granger, Elliot, extraction window, 4 days. Granger, Caleb, extraction window, pending approval. I blinked. That's my son. James leaned over, confused. Is this a recycled file? Old data maybe? Livia shook her head slowly. No. These timestamps are recent. That entry was updated just 3 days ago. Caleb's been added to the reclamation system. But he's one of them, I whispered. He helped orchestrate this. He signed my consent forms. He sold me. I stopped. The thought formed before the words. Unless someone higher up decided to cut him out. Livia looked grim. They don't have loyalty. They have quotas. Once you serve your function, you become expendable. Sometimes it's faster to harvest a disloyal insider than recruit another victim. James cursed under his breath. So they're cannibalizing their own. They always have, she replied. They just do it quietly. I sat back in the motel chair and stared at the screen, feeling the sting of something I never thought I'd feel again for Caleb, fear. Not for myself. For him. The boy I raised. The man who betrayed me. The stranger whose signature signed away part of my body, was now scheduled for the same fate. They'll go after him, I muttered. And he won't even see it coming. He thinks he's untouchable. Do you want to warn him? James asked carefully. Even after what he did to you? I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was no. Let him suffer. Let him wake up screaming, staring at a ceiling he doesn't recognize, feeling pieces of himself missing the way I did. Let him understand what he did to me. But then I remembered his face as a baby. I remembered his first words. His fever at 6. His tiny hands gripping mine in the hospital when he was the one hurt. I don't forgive him, I said finally. But if I let him die without warning, I become them. Livia nodded once, like she understood that weight. Then we do it quietly. No calls. No traceable messages. There's another way. She pulled out a contact, an old courier she once used during her clinic days to transport organs across state lines without records. A man named Victor, now working as a biker mechanic in Atlanta. He owed her a favor. We gave Victor a sealed envelope. Inside, Caleb's name, location, the screen capture from the flash drive, and 4 words scrawled in my handwriting: "They're coming for you." I didn't expect gratitude. I expected denial. Rage. But I'd planted the seed. If Caleb didn't believe it today, he'd believe it the moment someone followed him into a parking lot, or a hospital waiting room. We turned our attention back to the files. There were photos, blurred security footage from inside airports and clinics. Stills of sedated patients being wheeled through back hallways. All logged. All monetized. Every face had a number, and every number a price. Then we found something buried at the bottom. A file labeled, Harvest Pro_promo_video_internal use. MP4-inch. James clicked it. A corporate training video began playing. A slick voice narrated as scenes of hospitals flashed by. "Welcome to Harvest Pro, a revolutionary organ procurement platform built for efficiency, discretion, and growth. With over 300 Category B candidates across 14 countries, our extraction rate exceeds 92%, all while maintaining zero legal fallout for our affiliates." I couldn't breathe. Livia looked ill. They had branded it. Made it sleek. Marketable. A company built on unconsented sacrifice. And I was part of their success rate. The video ended with a tagline burned into my soul: "Harvest Pro, give more than life." That was it. I knew now what had to be done. We had names. We had footage. We had the internal voice of their goddamn training propaganda. We would go public. Leak everything. Burn every bridge. Start a fire so large that even the doctors who turned away would be forced to look. But just as James began organizing the evidence, Livia's phone buzzed. One message. No contact name. Just 2 words: "Too late." I grabbed the phone. Attached was a photo. It was Caleb, bound to a hospital gurney, mouth gagged, eyes wide with terror. Behind him, a man in surgical scrubs holding a clipboard. His name tag read, Dr. Roland Greaves. "They've taken him," I whispered. Livia looked pale. "They're not just watching us anymore. They're responding." I stared at the image until my vision blurred. Caleb. My son. Bound. Terrified. Just like I had been. Gagged in a surgical room not meant to heal. His face twisted in panic, but something behind his eyes, something deeper, looked almost like recognition. Like he finally understood what he'd done. I handed the phone to James and turned away, clenching my jaw until I tasted copper. "I didn't want him to suffer," I said, voice breaking. "I just wanted him to know what he'd become." Livia sat beside me, her voice a cold whisper. "They're sending a message. They know we accessed Pelican's drive. This is retaliation." "No," James said grimly. "It's bait. They want you to come for him, Elliot. They want you back under their knife. And they'll use your son to do it." He was right. The video file, the photo, the timing, it wasn't panic. It was choreography. A twisted game of organ chess, and Caleb was their knight. The one they were willing to sacrifice to draw out the king. Me. Livia leaned forward. "There's a way in. I know that facility. I helped design the off-grid wings. The place in the photo, it's in Tallahassee, registered as a sleep research clinic. Front entrance is surveillance heavy, but there's a side intake chute for private clients. That's where they move the unwilling." "You think we can get him out?" James asked. "We can get in," she said. "Getting out will depend on whether or not they still want Elliot alive." "I'm not letting my son die on a table like cattle," I said. "Not even after what he did to me." Livia stood and opened a locked case from the bottom of her duffel. Inside were fake IDs, scrubs, surgical masks, and 3 white tags labeled, "Staff, Harvest Pro Mobile Unit." "I never thought I'd wear one of these again," she muttered. But we'll go in as what they expect, scavengers. That night, we drove south. No headlights on back roads. Burner phones off. James disabled the car's onboard GPS and rerouted through old paper maps. By sunrise, we reached the outer limits of the clinic grounds. A wide steel fence surrounded it, trimmed with security cameras and fake biohazard warnings. We parked in an overgrown grove and made final prep. James would stay with the car, engine running. Livia and I would go in, masked, dressed as inbound logistics staff, carrying a fake bio container filled with weighted tools to simulate a transplant vessel. Livia's plan was simple. Get inside. Locate Caleb. Use her credentials to override the surgical schedule. Get out before the shift change. But plans don't survive contact with monsters. The intake chute was slick and metallic, lit by flickering emergency bulbs. We rolled the container on a gurney through the gate, where a bored man in a white coat scanned our tags with a handheld device. New? He asked, not looking up. Southwest Division, Livia replied. First assignment in Florida. He barely nodded and waved us through. Inside, the air changed. It wasn't the scent of medicine. It was bleach and rot. Paper-thin walls muffled groans. Each room had numbers instead of names. I wanted to throw up, but Livia grabbed my arm and whispered, "Focus. Level B3. That's where they keep high-priority specimens before dispatch." Specimens. That's what Caleb was now. We found an old service elevator and wrote it down in silence. B1. B2. Then B3. The door opened into a dim corridor painted pale green, lined with observation windows. We moved quickly, trying not to look through the glass, but I caught glimpses, dozens of people, unconscious or writhing. Some old. Some young. None awake. Then we saw him. Room 304. Caleb. Unconscious. Strapped to a table. And 4 in his arm. A marker drawn on his side in red. Left lung candidate. I froze. He's not just a kidney target. They're taking more. They are always taking more, Livia whispered. She swiped a keycard and disabled the lock. I rushed in, unstrapped his arms, and shook him. "Caleb," I said. "Wake up." He stirred, lips dry and cracked. "Dad." His eyes fluttered open, and then he screamed. "Security breach in room 304, a voice shouted over the intercom. Livia swore. "We're blown." They scanned our badges. It triggered a false match alert. Footsteps pounded above us. We had minutes, maybe seconds. I dragged Caleb off the table, throwing his arm around my shoulder. He staggered, barely able to walk. "Why are you here?" he rasped. "You're my son," I snapped. "Even now." Livia led us through the maintenance corridor, but when we reached the exit stairs, 2 guards stood waiting, armed with stun guns. They didn't speak. Just stepped forward, aiming. And that's when Caleb, barely conscious, did something I'll never forget. He stepped in front of me. "You want parts?" he hissed. "Start with mine." The guards hesitated, just long enough for Livia to drop a flashbang she had hidden in her coat pocket. It exploded in light. Screams. Smoke. We ran. Limping. Coughing. Blind. But we made it out. Barely. And in the car, as James peeled out of the lot, Caleb turned to me, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I didn't know, Dad." "I swear." "But I do now." I nodded. We weren't safe yet. Not even close. But for the first time, my son was finally awake. And now, we would all fight. We drove for hours without stopping. Caleb passed out in the back seat, his head resting against the fogged window, still pale, sweat beading along his hairline. I kept turning to look at him, half expecting him to disappear like a ghost. But he was real. Hurt. Weak. Alive. James drove like the road was chasing us. Livia sat silent, hunched over her laptop, working offline. The flash drive was still clutched in her hand like a loaded gun. I knew we couldn't keep running forever. We needed help, real help. Not a brother with a pistol. Not a haunted doctor on the run. We needed someone with power. So I made the call. A name I never thought I'd speak again, Vince Holloway, an old friend from my journalism days. We'd parted on bad terms after a story he ran got a whistleblower killed. I swore I'd never speak to him again. But now I needed the dirtiest, loudest, most fearless reporter in the country. He picked up on the first ring. Well, if it isn't the man they buried in the obits. I'm not dead, I said. Yet, he replied. Where the hell have you been, Elliot? I've got something, I said. Bigger than you've ever touched. Medical trafficking, black market transplants, internal documentation, surveillance footage, a training video. They took my kidney, Vince. They tagged me like meat. And now they're hunting my family. There was silence. Then, in a softer tone, where are you? Off-grid. But I can get you copies. We go public, together. Full exposure. You sure? No, I said. But I'm done being afraid. We agreed to meet at a safe house Vince maintained in New Orleans, an apartment above a defunct jazz club, soundproof and secure. We made the drive in 2 shifts, switching cars twice using fake plates James had stashed from his past life. Caleb stirred now and then but said little. He was different. Hollowed out. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or trauma. Maybe both. Vince greeted us with his usual swagger, but his eyes widened when he saw Caleb. Is that, my son, I said. A victim. And until recently, an accomplice. Caleb looked away. We uploaded everything, files, photos, videos, onto Vince's encrypted servers. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the list of victims. My God, he muttered. This isn't a story. It's a war crime. Then publish it, I said. Let the world see what they're doing. Vince nodded. I'll go live with it tonight. Headlines, source documents, recorded commentary. They can't bury it once it hits the net. But I should have known. That was never going to be enough. Not against men who don't just control media, they own it. At 3 a.m., there was a knock at the club's back door. 3 sharp taps, then 2. Vince's signal for trusted contact. He opened it without hesitation. A man in a gray suit stood there. No name tag. No smile. Just a leather folder in his hand and an earpiece. Mr. Holloway, he said, I represent a private security entity working in support of federal investigations into medical fraud. We've been tracking this case and would like to offer protection, in exchange for temporary suppression of publication. I stepped forward. You mean a gag order? Not at all, he said calmly. Just a delay. 30 days. For your safety. For everyone's safety. Vince looked at me. What do you think? I think if we wait, we die, I said. They're buying time to cover tracks. But the man smiled. You've already been tagged, Mr. Granger. You're not their priority anymore. But your son. Your brother. Dr. Hendricks. He glanced at each of us. They haven't been written off yet. My fists clenched. Is that a threat? It's a fact, he said. We're the only ones who can keep you breathing. But only if you cooperate. Vince hesitated. Then said, give us a moment. We huddled in the far corner, behind the soundboard where the jazz band used to set up. James was fuming. You believe that guy? I believe he's not with the government, I said. He's with them. And if we wait, we'll all disappear, quietly. Livia nodded. They don't issue warnings twice. We turned back to answer him, but he was gone. Just, gone. Door ajar. No trace. And in his place, a small black box on the floor. Blinking red. James dove forward, grabbed it, and threw it into the old beer cooler in the corner. Just in time. Boom. The explosion shook the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. The club's glass shattered like ice. We hit the floor, covering Caleb with our bodies. When it was over, the silence rang louder than the blast. They weren't offering protection. They were offering a coffin. But they made one mistake. They left the servers intact. And when Vince crawled out from behind the bar, coughing blood, he gasped, "Upload it. Everything. Now." So we did. Every file. Every image. Every video. The world would know. But so would they. Within 2 hours of the upload, it was everywhere. News outlets that usually ignored conspiracy claims were running headlines like wildfire, black market transplants in U.S. hospitals. Whistleblower leaks alleged organ trafficking network, victim speaks out, they took my kidney while I slept. My face, pale, worn, scarred, was now on 1,000 screens. They used the photo Vince took of me standing in front of the jazz club, shirt pulled up slightly to show the surgical scar and the radiograph of the metallic clip embedded in my side. That single image broke through the wall of silence. It made people feel something. Horror. Empathy. Fear. I wasn't the kind of person who ever wanted attention. But in those hours, I wasn't a man anymore. I was evidence. The video Vince stitched together, clips from the Harvest Pro training promo, voice recordings from Pelican, photos from Livia's files, was viewed over 9 million times before sunrise. Reddit threads exploded. Journalists started connecting the dots. Even a few medical professionals spoke up anonymously, admitting they'd seen suspicious patterns in their own hospitals but had been too afraid to report them. It worked. The story was out. But with the light came the shadows. By noon, we received the first encrypted message through Vince's contact form. No sender name. Just a photo. Me, James, Livia, and Caleb leaving the club, framed, time-stamped, watched. And beneath it, the caption, "Dead men don't get interviews." Then another came. And another. Our photos. Caleb's high school. James' cabin. Livia's fake identity papers. A bounty had been placed. Not legal. Not in cash. But in blood. Livia pulled up the dark web link. It was buried in a user forum disguised as a transplant waiting list. Underneath the profile, Green Chamber 47, a post read, Category B subject escaped. Protocol breach. Reward offered for confirmation of permanent silence. Open contract. Attached was my photo. Open contract, James muttered. That means any freelance hitter with a line into the black market circuit will be looking for you. And they won't care how many bystanders get caught. Caleb was pacing. His face pale, fingers shaking. This is because of me. If I hadn't signed those papers, you're not the reason, I snapped. You were a tool. They'd had this machine running long before you showed up. But now they've been exposed, and they're bleeding. And cornered animals bite the hardest. Vince looked grim. We need to move. And we need backup. He called in favors from journalists, hackers, and even a couple of ex-cops who'd been drummed out for digging too deep. They were willing to help, for now. The public was watching. And that gave us cover. But not for long. We moved into a warehouse on the edge of town owned by one of Vince's old sources, a place with no address and blackout panels on the windows. We set up there like a war room. Multiple laptops. Burner phones. Bulletproof vests. We were no longer witnesses. We were targets holding the detonator. That night, Livia made a breakthrough. She decrypted part of the server Pelican had given us. Buried deep in the files was a list labeled insurance accounts. Offshore deposits made to donors who were later found dead. Bribes to medical staff. And then, something new. A second flash drive Pelican had smuggled in before he vanished. It contained one line of text: Mordecai has a name. And below it, Roland Greaves equals Mordecai. Livia's breath caught. It was him. He wasn't just a surgeon. He was the architect. The face of the program. I slammed my hand on the table. Then he dies in the light. Publicly. Painfully. With everything he's built burned behind him. Vince nodded. I'll draft an open dossier. Photos, banking records, patient deaths connected to him. I want it airtight. James sharpened his knives, silently. And Caleb? He finally spoke. If I face him, I don't know what I'll say. I looked at my son. For a moment, I didn't see the man who betrayed me. I saw the boy who used to ask why stars moved. You won't have to say anything, I said. He'll already know. We worked through the night. Every second, a clock ticking down on our lives. And just before dawn, an unmarked van parked across the street. The light stayed off. The engine idled. And I whispered, they've found us again. The van didn't move for 20 minutes. No one stepped out. No lights, no motion, just an engine purring softly, like it was waiting for someone inside our walls to panic first. James paced like a lion. Caleb sat in the far corner gripping a wrench he didn't seem to realize he was holding upside down. Livia stared at the van through a gap in the blackout curtain, her eyes cold. They're not here to kill us, she murmured. Not yet. This is pressure. They're waiting to see if we'll run, or if we'll break first. Vince clicked the safety off a revolver that looked like it hadn't been fired since the Reagan era. I don't break, he said flatly. And I don't run. Not anymore. But I was already thinking ahead. That van wasn't just a threat. It was a question: what happens when people like us push too far? We'd exposed Mordecai. Uploaded their secrets. Named names. And we weren't dead yet. That meant something worse was coming. Let me go out there, I said. They came for me. James grabbed my arm. Elliot, don't be stupid. I'm not. I'm bait. I slid open the warehouse's rusted side door, gun tucked inside my coat. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear the wind. The morning was still dark, fog curling off the pavement like ghosts rising to watch. I stepped toward the van, counting each slow step. 5. 10. 15. At 20 steps, the passenger door creaked open. A man stepped out. Not masked. Not armed. Just a courier uniform and a gray envelope in hand. His face was familiar in a way that made me nauseous, because it was clean. Too clean. Like someone who had delivered death 1,000 times and learned to smile while doing it. He spoke softly. Mr. Granger, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just the messenger. I pointed the gun at him. And I'm just the warning shot. He raised the envelope like a white flag. They've offered you terms. A ceasefire. I lowered the gun slightly. Terms. They'll remove the bounty. Wipe your record from the reclamation logs. You and your associates walk free. In exchange for what? For silence, he said. The site comes down. No more interviews. You disappear again. I laughed, bitter. You carved into me like a carcass. And now you want me quiet? You were never supposed to wake up, he said, too calmly. But we're willing to forgive that. Not many people get second chances from Mordecai. I stepped closer. You tell Greaves I've already had my second chance. And now it's his turn to beg for one. I snatched the envelope and walked back to the warehouse. Vince opened it as soon as I stepped inside. Inside was a flash drive and a note. The drive contained one thing, a full video confession. Not from Mordecai, but from Melissa. My ex-wife. The one who signed the consent forms. The one who helped orchestrate my mutilation. The video played in an echoey, sterile room. She sat alone, pale, her hands folded in her lap. She looked directly at the camera and said, I was part of the Mordecai project. I forged signatures. I falsified lab results. I helped tag over 300 unwilling donors. And I did it because I believed the ends justified the means. But I was wrong. Elliot, if you see this. I'm sorry. They're going to kill me for this video. I know that. But maybe if you see it, you'll understand. They promised me control. Power. But I never saw it until they put me on the list too. I'm next. And when they take me, there won't be anything left to confess. The screen went black. We sat in silence. Livia whispered, they're not offering peace. They're offering closure, their kind of closure. Caleb stood, his voice cracking. She was my mom. But she never protected anyone. Not even herself. She was broken long before she broke us, I said. And now, we finish what she started. Vince turned to us, fire in his eyes. This confession. It's the detonator. We leak it tonight. No passwords, no walls, open access, global dump. We don't ask for justice. We drag it out screaming. We posted the video at 8:42 p.m. Eastern Time. It went nuclear. And that's when the phone rang. A landline James installed just days ago. No caller ID. No warning. Just a single word from the voice on the other end, run. Then the line went dead. I turned to the others, chest tight. They're coming again. This time, to end it. The warehouse lights flickered as the phone went dead. My mouth went dry. James grabbed our go bags before I even spoke. Livia was already shutting down the hard drives and pulling out the portable SSDs. Caleb stood frozen, one hand still gripping the photo of his mother, her last words forever burned into our memory. We move now, I snapped. No time for second guesses. We barely made it to the van before the first drone buzzed overhead. A mechanical hum cut through the night air, followed by a sharp red beam scanning the warehouse roof. Vince hissed, they've upgraded. That's military-grade surveillance. Not freelance. That confirmed it, Mordecai was no longer sending scavengers. They were sending a cleanup crew. Government-trained. Private sector paid. Shadows in suits with no faces and no fingerprints. James peeled out of the alley as the first explosion rocked the street behind us. The warehouse went up in a ball of fire, years of secrets and our only safe house, turned to ash in seconds. We swerved through back roads, trying to stay off major intersections. Livia was furiously encrypting the last few files from the SSD, muttering coordinates and codenames as she typed. We've got a backup drop, she said. Encrypted server hidden through a chain of dead sites in Iceland. If we make it another 48 hours without getting caught, it'll auto-dump everything, including the second part of Melissa's confession. Second part? I asked, eyes wide. She gave them names, Livia said. Board members. Medical contractors. Politicians. It wasn't just guilt. It was revenge. I looked back at Caleb, who sat trembling in the back seat, his lips pressed so tight they'd gone white. "She tried to save you," I said gently. "At the end. Maybe not for redemption. But for blood." He nodded once. "I think she knew she'd never get to say it to me. So she said it to the world instead." We reached the edge of Baton Rouge before the second van tailed us. This one didn't blink its lights. It didn't swerve or tailgate. It just followed, smooth and patient. James took the first exit, hoping to lose them. But they followed. He cut across a gas station. They stayed. "They've got a tracker," Livia muttered. "Somewhere in the van. They know exactly where we are." "Then we don't ditch them," Vince said. "We turn them into witnesses." He pulled out his phone, already live streaming on a private social media account followed by international journalists and activists. "We're broadcasting," he said. "If they try anything, the world will see it in real time." The van behind us swerved. It slowed. Then disappeared behind an underpass. "They're watching the feed," James muttered. "They know we're not in the dark anymore." But even as that one left, we knew another would follow. Always. Until someone buried us or we buried them. That night, we hid in an abandoned motel off the interstate. The kind with broken vending machines and stained ceilings. No cameras. No IDs. Livia took the first watch. James collapsed near the window with a loaded pistol across his chest. Vince was still on his laptop, documenting every minute like a war journalist embedded behind enemy lines. I sat across from Caleb in the dim light of the bathroom, the only door that's still locked. He finally spoke. "Do you think I'll ever be forgiven?" I swallowed. "You didn't cut me open. But you let them. That's not nothing. But you're here now. You bled for me." He nodded slowly, then said, "I used to think I was the smartest person in the room. That I'd found a way to win in a world rigged against us. And now?" I asked. He looked me in the eye. "Now I know the world isn't just rigged. It's owned. And we're just bodies to be spent." I reached over and took his hand. For the first time in over a decade, it felt like we weren't father and son, just two survivors clinging to the wreckage of the same storm. But as we sat there in the motel light, something new appeared on Vince's feed. A message. From a private account. No name. Just a set of coordinates. And one line, "You want Mordecai? Come dig him out yourself." Attached was a photo of a coastal estate. Gated. Towering. With a familiar figure walking the balcony. Dr. Roland Greaves. Alive. Unafraid. Unhunted. "This is it," Livia said. "That's where the head sleeps. And maybe," I whispered, "where it comes off." We left before dawn. No headlights. No chatter. Just determination thick in the air, like the humidity pressing against our skin. The coordinates led to the Louisiana coast, an isolated bluff surrounded by marsh and high iron fencing. From above, it looked like a fortress. From the ground, it looked like the last place a man like Roland Greaves would ever need to run from. Because he wasn't hiding. He was inviting us in. Livia studied the drone photo on Vince's laptop. "Private security here, here, and here," she murmured, circling the entry points. "But they're spaced too wide." "That's deliberate." "Why?" James asked. "Because they want to catch us inside," she said. "Not outside. A clean kill in the dark. No cameras. No witnesses. Just another accident in a private estate." We circled the perimeter, ditching the van a half-mile away. The air stank of salt and rot and something chemical underneath it. Caleb walked close to me. He hadn't said much since the motel. I could feel him holding something in, like a dam waiting to burst. The estate loomed as we approached. Stone walls. A sprawling glass facade. Greaves had built a sanctuary with blood money and bones. Livia bypassed the gate's electronic lock with an old code from her clinic days. They never changed it, she muttered. Arrogant bastard. We slipped through the servant entrance into a long hallway lined with paintings of nothing, abstract lines and bleeding colors, like chaos framed for taste. And at the far end, a stairwell. Leading down. That's where he is, I whispered. How do you know? James asked. Because men like him don't live at the top, I said. They bury themselves beneath the lies. We descended into cold concrete and humming lights. The hallway at the bottom wasn't sterile like a clinic. It was luxurious. Leather couches. Rich carpets. Screens on every wall showing security feeds, empty operating rooms, holding chambers, incineration units. A kingdom of silence. And then, we found him. Dr. Roland Greaves stood behind a glass wall in a room filled with soft light and two large servers glowing behind him. He was in a robe. Barefoot. Drinking tea. When he saw us, he smiled. Mr. Granger, he said through a speaker. You've traveled a long way. I raised my gun. Unlock the door. He took another sip of tea. You've already lost, he said calmly. I know it. And now, so do you. Livia stepped forward. We released everything, Roland. Your name. Your work. Melissa's confession. There's nowhere left to hide. Ah, but I don't need to hide, he said. You misunderstand power. You think exposure equals justice. But people don't care, not for long. They forget. They forgive. They scroll. And by next week, the world will be chasing another horror. Caleb stepped up beside me. His voice was low, strained. You tagged me. You were going to cut me up like inventory. Greaves didn't blink. You were a failure, Caleb. Weak. You let sentiment delay the extraction. That made you expendable. Caleb's hands trembled. Don't listen to him, I whispered. He's already drowning. That's why he's talking. But Greaves kept going. You think your confession videos matter? That data can't be scrubbed. Rewritten. The system you've cracked is just one limb. You haven't even touched the brain. James reached for the door controls, but they were locked behind biometrics. He sealed himself in, he growled. It's a tomb. Greaves tapped the glass. You won't break it in time. And that's when Caleb did the one thing no one expected. He drew a flash drive from his coat pocket, Melissa's second video. She named you. But she also left this, he said. One final override code. Your biometric signature. She stole it before they marked her for disposal. Greaves finally froze. Caleb stepped to the panel and inserted the drive. The screen blinked red. Override accepted. Lock disengaged. The door hissed open. Greaves dropped the teacup. It shattered like glass nerves across marble. I stepped in first. The silence felt like a scream. And when I looked him in the eye, I didn't see a surgeon. I saw a butcher who thought himself God. You carved me, I whispered. Now you get to feel what it's like to be at the table. No, he said. I'm more valuable alive. And that's the problem, I replied. But I didn't shoot him. I turned to Vince. You wanted the real headline? He nodded. Yeah. Live and in color. Vince started the live stream. Greaves lunged for the servers, but James tackled him before he made it 2 feet. We bound him. Tied him to the surgical chair in the center of his own sanctum. His mouth gagged, his face on camera. Vince looked into the lens. This is Roland Greaves. The man behind the Mordecai Protocol. You're looking at the face of medical genocide. Caleb whispered, now the world can carve him apart, one truth at a time. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a storm. A reckoning. And not all of us would survive it. The live stream ran for 49 minutes. Roland Greaves, bound, gagged, eyes wide and watering, was seen by over 12 million people within hours. Journalists picked it up, dubbing it the Harvest Chair Confession. Politicians were forced to comment. The FBI issued a vague statement about ongoing investigations. And for the first time since this hell began, people were afraid of him. But then the real machine started to move. The next morning, a convoy of black SUVs appeared outside the estate. Not police. Not federal. Private security contractors, with insignia so generic they may as well have said erased. They didn't storm the house. They walked up calmly, handed us a document, and said 6 words, "We're here for the asset's protection." I looked down at the file. An emergency order stamped with corporate custody transfer authorization. And at the bottom, a forged signature from Caleb. My son froze. I never signed anything. They don't care, Livia said quietly. They're creating a paper trail before they erase the man, and everything connected to him. James stepped forward, gun holstered but eyes hard. You're not taking him. Not without a court order. The lead agent smiled thinly. We don't need courts where we operate. That's when Vince started recording again. You're on live stream, he said. Say that again. I dare you. The agent paused. For a moment, I saw it, the discomfort. Not fear, but the awareness that someone was watching. They backed off. For now. But we knew it was temporary. The moment the feeds went dark, so would Greaves. We had hours. Maybe less. So we made our move. Livia cloned the Mordecai server with the override key. Not just documents this time, but real-time financial transactions, medical logs, internal chat histories. Proof that Greaves wasn't just a rogue surgeon, he was part of a global black market network backed by offshore biotech companies and fake nonprofits. One of those shell companies was registered in my name. I stared at it in disbelief. They built a donor profile under my identity. Used it to launder payouts. If I had died in that hospital, they would have pinned the whole operation on me. Livia nodded grimly. That's how they survive. Every time one of them burns, they light someone else in their place. They were going to make you the fall, James added. Now they're scrambling because you didn't die on schedule. We uploaded the cloned server to 3 independent watchdog networks. Each one promised to hold the files as public evidence. We couldn't stop Mordecai from trying to bury the truth, but we could make it harder for them to erase it entirely. By nightfall, the estate was surrounded. Helicopters. Unmarked vans. Black drones circling like flies. The contractors weren't waiting anymore. A voice boomed over a speaker, release the detainee. Or face tactical retrieval. I looked at Caleb. We give him up, he vanishes. No trial. No truth. Just silence. Caleb stepped forward, hands shaking. Then let's make it a trade. What do you mean? I asked. He pulled a file from his backpack, the one Melissa had left him. Inside were pages of names. Bank accounts. Internal communications between Greaves and the investors. Politicians. Hospital directors. Even a senator. We release Greaves, Caleb said, but only in front of every single camera. We stage it. Loud. Messy. And we dump the final part of this file the second he walks out of the door. It was brilliant. Let the enemy walk, but only after dragging everyone else with him. A devil's parade. One Greaves couldn't stop even if he ran. We prepared the scene. Set up microphones. Position the cameras. James held Greaves by the collar, pressing the barrel of a gun to his back. Vince stepped into the frame. "This man is not a doctor," he said. "He is a manufacturer of corpses. A curator of silence. And behind him are names who helped fund and protect him. When we release him, the rest of the story will go live. If anything happens to us, it goes live anyway." Greaves didn't speak. Didn't blink. But I saw it, the first real sign of fear. He had built a kingdom in the shadows. And now the light was burning it down. We opened the gate. The contractors moved quickly, snatching him, shielding him, vanishing like they'd never been there. But as they disappeared into the night, Vince clicked "Upload" on the final drop. It hit the net like a thunderclap. And suddenly, everything changed. News anchors had no choice but to name names. Protests erupted outside hospitals. CEOs resigned. Investigations were launched. Congressional hearings were scheduled. But the cost was coming for us. Because we'd exposed them all. And now, we were the next ones marked for reclamation. The morning after the final drop, we weren't hiding anymore. We were the news. Every broadcast led with our story. Headlines screamed phrases we never imagined we'd see: "Organ Harvest Network uncovered, private hospitals under investigation, whistleblowers in danger as corporate retaliation escalates," but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a countdown. The estate was abandoned within an hour after Greaves was taken. We knew they'd sweep it, sanitize every trace we left behind. So we split up. James and Vince took the SSD backups to a secure location in Houston. Livia disappeared under a new identity with contacts from her old clinic days. And Caleb and we went home. Not because it was safe, but because there was nothing left to run from. My old house in Vermont was still standing. Quiet. Forgotten. I'd left it in a rush all those weeks ago, never expecting to return. But now, it felt right. Full circle. The place where they marked me, now the place where I'd mark the end. We lasted 3 days before the first break-in. They didn't use masks. They didn't creep. They walked through the front door at 2:13 p.m., broad daylight. 2 men. Clean suits. No emotion. No badges. Just polished shoes and gloved hands. They weren't here to ask questions. Caleb was in the kitchen. I was in the living room. We made eye contact through the hall, and in that moment, everything froze. He whispered, "Front closet." Now. I dove for the shotgun James had insisted I keep by the door. Caleb grabbed the fire extinguisher and swung it hard at the first man just as he stepped into the hall. The impact sent him crashing into the bookshelf. The second man lunged forward, but I raised the shotgun, heart pounding so hard I could barely see. "Don't move," I barked. He didn't. But he smiled. "You think exposure makes you untouchable," he said calmly. "You're not a hero. You're just delayed inventory." I fired. A warning shot. Just past his ear. The drywall exploded. He flinched, finally. Not because he was afraid to die, but because, for once, we weren't playing by their rules. They ran. We didn't chase. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about everyone they hadn't silenced. That night, we went live again. Vince patched in from Houston. Livia joined under her new alias. Even James appeared briefly, his voice disguised, his face blurred. And we issued one final message to the world. "We are not afraid," I said. "And we are not alone. For every one of us they try to erase, 10 more will rise. You know the names now. The patterns. The lies. Watch your hospitals. Watch your records. Don't let them tag you like they tagged me. It became a movement. A real one. Unmarked. Anonymous medics stepped forward. Families shared stories. Former patients revealed suspicious surgeries. For the first time, the Mordecai Protocol had nowhere to hide. But victory doesn't erase scars. I still wake up clutching my side some nights, expecting to feel blood. Caleb still flinches when the doorbell rings. James moved off-grid completely. No more calls. No more addresses. Vince lost his job. But not his voice. He writes now. Under a pen name. His books are selling. And Livia? She's free. For now. But the last message we received from an unknown number chilled me more than anything since that hospital bed. You cut off the arm. But the brain is still alive. We don't know who sent it. Or where it came from. But we knew what it meant. Greaves may be gone. But the system? It's waiting to grow back. 2 months passed. The headlines faded. Lawsuits were filed, then quietly delayed. Greaves disappeared, allegedly into protective custody. Some media outlets tried to dismiss the whole thing as medical mismanagement or unregulated bioresearch. But we knew better. The files were still online. The footage. Melissa's confession. The live streams. They couldn't erase it all. But they didn't need to. They just needed to replace it. That's how evil survives. Not through silence, but through distraction. It started small. Livia sent me a video link buried in a deep web chat room. A recruitment ad. Polished. High budget. Lush music. Words that sounded too familiar. You deserve to be part of something bigger. We believe in second chances, for lives and for legacies. And then a name appeared. A new name. Project Thanatos. Not Mordecai. But something worse. Thanatos wasn't about harvesting organs from unwilling victims. No, it was about preserving elite ones. Keeping the wealthy and powerful alive indefinitely, using new bioaugmentation tech and full-body resource replacement. The donors weren't asked. Same pipeline. Same shadow companies. New branding. A fresh monster with smoother skin. The footage panned across pristine facilities. Accelerated longevity. Restorative transfer systems. Fully anonymous sourcing. Sourcing. That was the word they used instead of people. I felt sick. The site listed partner hospitals across 6 countries. All different from those under investigation for Mordecai. They were already 10 steps ahead. They didn't pause, I whispered to Livia over a scrambled call. They just rebranded. Greaves was never the brain, she replied. He was just the face. Disposable. They've had this in motion for years. Thanatos is the upgrade. James confirmed it later that night. He'd intercepted chatter on a dark finance board, encrypted contracts for long-term biological storage services, marked with THN 44 codes. We traced one of the shipping manifests to a facility in Slovakia. It was disguised as a pharmaceutical cold chain logistics firm. The manifest listed several donor IDs. And one of them. Granger, E3. I stared at it for a long time. Elliot Granger. 3rd sample. They'd cloned me. Not literally. But they'd copied my donor profile, forged multiple identities under my name, and distributed them globally as decoys for asset laundering. I was a template now. A model of extraction. Something to be replicated, resold, and reused. They hadn't just failed to kill me. They'd turned me into a blueprint for future victims. That's when I knew we weren't done. We hadn't even come close. We hadn't exposed the system, we'd scratched its surface. Caleb came to me that night. "I want in," he said. "All the way." I looked at him carefully. He was different now. Not scared. Not guilt-stricken. Focused. "I helped them once," he said. "Now I want to help destroy them." I nodded. "Then we start from the inside." We reactivated our network. Livia made contact with a former Thanatos lab tech willing to talk, for a price. Vince secured a publisher for a full-length exposé. James recruited a new circle of operatives, survivors, whistleblowers, digital bloodhounds. It wasn't just a leak this time. It would be a surgical strike. Because Thanatos didn't just want to cheat death. They wanted to monetize it. And the only way to kill something that feeds on silence is to make it scream. It started with a fingerprint. The Thanatos whistleblower, an ex-surgical technician named Morgan Rusk, didn't trust anyone. He'd vanished 2 years prior after faking his own death during a reclamation gone wrong. Livia found him living out of a storage container in Denmark, using a stolen biometric profile just to buy food. He had one thing to offer: access. Not passwords. Not spreadsheets. A fingerprint. The master print for Thanatos Tier 2 entry protocol. And that was all we needed. We didn't go in guns blazing. That wasn't our war. We went in as they would never expect, as ghosts wearing their own skin. Livia recreated the Thanatos staff tags. James cloned encrypted RFID cards from a smuggled courier badge. Vince embedded his voice behind a shell corporation offering advanced donor compliance logistics. Caleb and I. We were the couriers. Live cargo. Donor Class B. We boarded a chartered transport to a Thanatos satellite clinic in eastern Slovakia. It was the same one that had my fake ID, Granger 3, listed on its manifest. I was the body they expected. But I was no longer a victim. I was the fuse. They scanned our forged tags and welcomed us in like any other shipment. The irony was brutal. They'd spent years perfecting the art of making us disappear. Now we were using it to walk through their front door. The facility was cold. Too clean. The hallways lined with encrypted biometric locks, humming machines, and rooms that smelled of metal and formalin. Every wall had a screen pulsing with rotating numbers, vitals. Timing. Priority codes. One door bore my name. Donor profile, Granger E3, extraction scheduled 48H. Inside was a bed. A vitals monitor. Sterile bags prepped for collection. There was a body on the table. Male. Late 60s. Bald. Pale. My height. My build. My clone. Or rather, a man built in my image. Paper trail perfect. No family. No medical disputes. A digital life programmed from my past. I turned to Caleb. This is what they've done. To me. To everyone. He nodded. Let's make it count. We planted the datapulse rig under the vitals console. A custom program that would, once activated, inject a malicious script through the biometric systems. Not just to disable them. To upload everything they'd buried in this facility. Names. Footage. Live scans. Experimental logs. And worst of all, the list of acceptable non-voluntary donors sourced from vulnerable populations across the globe. When it launched, it would beam every dark secret to the open web in 14 different languages simultaneously. But we had to escape first. And Thanatos doesn't leave doors open. Our cover broke when one of the biometric systems flagged Caleb's pulse as anomalous. Security tightened. Alarms didn't sound, but guards began to cluster. We split up. Caleb and James lured them away through a maintenance shaft. Vince remotely guided them using thermal sensors from his laptop half a continent away. Livia and I stayed behind to trigger the upload manually. When the countdown began, the clinic began sealing itself. Locks hissed shut. Lights dimmed. And over the intercom, a voice, calm and artificial, began to recite, Security Protocol Thanatos 0 activated. All exits sealed. Biological inventory secured. Inventory. That word again. I looked at Livia. There's no way out for us, is there? She didn't answer. Just pressed her hand against the scanner, forcing the final phase of the upload. Then she handed me the last flash drive. You go. I'm not leaving you, I said. You're not the story anymore, she replied. You're the witness. The world already knows what they did to you. Now they need to know how it ends. I grabbed her hand. We'll find another way. But the doors were already closing. She shoved me out through the last emergency exit just before it sealed. Then she smiled, just once. Now run. I did. I didn't look back. 20 minutes later, the entire system came crashing down. The Thanatos files detonated across the internet like a virus of truth. Servers melted. Clinics froze. Hospitals panicked. And when the media asked what it meant, we gave them one final headline: they built a system to harvest the weak. Now we've taken the blade back. But I never saw Livia again. She stayed in the dark. So the rest of us could live in the light. One chapter left. I live quietly now. No headlines. No interviews. No parades for the whistleblowers. Just early mornings with black coffee, the hum of distant traffic, and the weight of everything I've seen pressing against the ribs they didn't take. I still have the scar. The one over my kidney. The one I touch every day, not because it hurts anymore, but because it reminds me I survived. They tried to erase me. Mark me. Break me open and leave me empty. But I'm still here. Caleb's here too. He moved into the guest house out back. He teaches now, quietly, at a local trade school under a new name. He never speaks publicly. Not because he's afraid, but because he believes his penance is listening more than talking. We speak, sometimes. Not like father and son. Not like strangers either. Somewhere in between. James disappeared 6 weeks after the Thanatos leak. No note. Just a package left on my porch, a flip phone, a folding knife, and a card that said, "You'll know when to use them." He's alive, I think. Somewhere in the wind. And Livia. She's gone. But she gave us a future. The Thanatos drop changed everything. International probes. Mass arrests. Half a dozen hospitals shut down. Several research labs linked to organ smuggling were dismantled across Europe and South America. A few CEOs were charged, but not jailed. You can guess why. Still, something changed. People began to look closer at their medical records. Families started asking the right questions. Victims came forward. And in a world that forgets so quickly, some didn't forget this time. Because they'd seen the video. They'd seen me. The man who woke up without a kidney. The man whose own family sold his body for profit. The man who took on a system with only his pain and his truth, and won, even if the cost nearly killed him. I've been asked to speak again. To write. To appear on shows. But I said no. I don't need applause. I don't need pity. I just needed to tell the truth. And now I have. So if you've made it this far, if you listened to this story from the beginning, if you felt even a fraction of what I did when I woke up on that hospital table, stitched, altered, betrayed, then do one thing for me: speak. Ask questions. Demand answers. Refuse to be just a number in a file or a target in a corridor. Because the next time a clinic asks you to sign without reading, It might be your name on that table. And to every silent listener out there, tell me something before we end this. Where are you listening from? Because I want to know which corners of the world still have people willing to hear the truth. And if you made it through my story, and if you believe it matters, then please, like, share, subscribe. Not for me. For the next voice that's afraid to speak. For the next survivor still searching for their scar. For the ones who never woke up. This is Elliot Granger. And I am still alive.